So, you've been looking around at other classrooms or even scrolling social media, and you see a lot of people using clip charts, and you're wondering, what are they? Should you be using them? And what are some alternatives to clip charts? Well, today I'm going to be diving into why I personally don't use clip charts anymore, my story about it, the pros and the cons, and what I choose to use instead. So, with that being said, let's dive in. Hey, teacher bestie. My name's Helena, and I'm the creator of the Present Teacher Podcast. I'm a first year teacher coach, and in this podcast, you are going to learn everything from simple, actionable classroom management, social emotional learning, and teacher wellness strategies. You know that impact you want to make in the classroom? Well, we're going to make it happen here. So, when I first started teaching, and even when I was student teaching, many of the teachers I was under were using clip charts. And if you're not familiar with what clip charts are, they are these different colored paper, and typically you have clothespins. Everybody starts off at a color, and students can either move up or down based on their behavior throughout the day. Now, I use this again because a lot of the teachers I worked with and a lot of the teachers that mentored me use them. However, I quickly realized that this wasn't for me because oftentimes when I would have a student clip down, they would completely shut down. And oftentimes it would be really hard to get them back to center and to regulate their emotions. And oftentimes they didn't actually end up learning anything. These students often labeled themselves as like the mean kid or the bad kid. And don't get me wrong, for some of my students it worked, but it wasn't reaching all my students, and I realized I wanted to focus on something a little more positive. So those were some of the cons I found when it came to whether or not I used a clip chart. And so I wanted to find something that was a little more positive, and I wanted to address disruptive behavior either with my body language or instead with silent conversations and replacement skills or replacement behaviors that my students would do throughout the day. Because one thing that's important to know is behavior is just communication. There's honestly no such thing as good or bad behavior. There's just desired and disruptive behavior. And so when students are partaking in disruptive behavior, oftentimes they are articulating a need or a want that's not being met. And so when you get to the root cause of what disruptive behavior, the reason they are partaking in disruptive behavior, it's a lot easier for them to fix it and to avoid it in the future. So, with all that being said, those are personally my story behind flip charts and why I personally don't use them. So, with that being said, let's talk about what I use instead. So, the first thing that I use instead are classroom procedures. So, classroom procedures are how you want your students to interact with each other and throughout the room. They are things like lining up, pushing in their chair, grabbing a drink of water, turning in something, raising their hand, talking to a partner. All these things are different classroom procedures. And instead of relying on a clip chart to tell my students whether they're doing right or wrong, I make sure, especially during the first couple weeks, to set really strong classroom procedures. And I like to think of them as habits. When your students naturally follow the expectations in class, you're not going to have to run into as many disruptive behavior and to redirect it as often. So, my goal in the first couple months of school is to make sure that following the expectations and procedures is a habit for my class. And that happens by intentionally planning when I'm teaching it and to review it often throughout the year and to make sure my students practice. On average, they say it takes about 27 times for something to become a habit. So, with all that being said, I make sure to, like I said, review it throughout the year. And I actually have classroom procedure slides that you can definitely check out in the description. But relying on classroom procedures help my students follow expectations so that I don't have to narrowly label their behavior as good or bad and have them clip up or down in front of everybody so they feel embarrassed or called out. So that's the first thing I rely on are my classroom procedures, making them a habit so that my classroom runs on autopilot the way it's supposed to. The second thing I like to rely on are different levels of redirection. So, when someone is choosing to partake in disruptive behavior, and it's not a class as a whole, but one particular student, there's different levels of interaction I will give before it becomes a conversation or before I immediately take action. Now, I what I often did my first couple years is I would give my students a lot of warnings before I took any action or had them clip down, which meant it took my students several times before they actually fixed their behavior. Now, instead, I follow a different path to addressing disruptive behavior. First thing I do is proximity. Let's say I have two students who are talking when I'm talking. Instead of calling them out in class or saying so and so clip down, what I will do is I'll go stand by them because naturally, what my mentor teacher referred to as grazing the lawn, I'll walk around. And when you're constantly walking around, your students then will fix their behavior because you're right there and you can see them and they're reminded of what the expectation is. So that's the first step. I don't stand over them intimidatingly, but I just walk around and half the time that'll fix that'll redirect the behavior because then they're reminded, oh, she's teaching and she's next to me. I should probably pay attention. The second point or step I will take if proximity doesn't work is I will start pointing out or shouting out students who are following the expectation or the procedure that the other student is, and I'll point out specifically what they are doing that the other student isn't. So let's go back to the example. I have two students who are talking when I'm talking. I walk next to them, I graze, mow the lawn, and they're still talking. So what I'll do is thank you so much, red group, for having your eyes on me. I love how yellow group has a bubble in their mouth and they're at a level 0. I love how blue group is showing me that they're actively listening. Thank you so much, green group, for showing me that, we have our listening ears on. And then once those two students fix it, I'll call on their group to praise them too. Thank you so much, orange group, for having your eyes on me at a level 0. And there we go. People got praise. I didn't call them out, solely. They fixed their behavior once they noticed that their friends were getting praise and they fixed and followed the behavior that I was expecting and that I gave praise to. They fixed their behavior to match that. So that's what I will do if the proximity doesn't work. So let's say I've tried proximity, I've tried shouting out, and they're still not getting it. I will release the class to work independently and I will pull that student outside into the hallway for a sideline conversation. I don't believe in calling out students in front of their friends because that'll lead to a power struggle where it's just an arguing match, and oftentimes the student is feeling like they're being personally attacked and called out, and so they might say something smart remark back, and then you're in a struggle over who has power over the class. So instead, I'll have a silent conversation with them where I'll say, hey, I noticed that you are having a hard time focusing on class and you are talking to so and so. Is there something going on, or what's going on, or have you noticed that too, or why do you think that is? And we'll have a discussion on what I noticed. They'll tell me the root cause. Maybe something happened. Maybe they had a hard time with a problem, something like that. I was like, perfect. Well, next time, the expectation is this. The expectation is during whole group, we sit quietly and we do raise our hand if we have a question. If next time you have a question or you need help with something, let's wait until either I'm done teaching, or can you raise your hand? Because oftentimes another student will have the same question on that same problem. And if you don't feel comfortable with that, just give me like a thumbs down sign by your chest or something, or down below, and I'll know to come and ask you if you have a question, if you feel too embarrassed to ask in front of the class. And then we'll work something out, and then, we'll have that sideline conversation. We get to the root cause of why the student is talking to another friend. And if need be, hopefully that fixes it and you have a plan for how to solve it next time, or they need to practice the procedure. So the natural consequences, now that we're going to practice what it should look like and sound like to listen during whole group or something like that. So providing a natural consequence is making sure it's related. I'm not going to say because you were talking in class, I'm now going to take away your recess. Now that you are talking in class, let's practice what the expectation is. Now, let's say I've had a sideline conversation. I use proximity. I did shout outs. I've had sideline conversations, and it's a continual thing. It's a continual undesired behavior, disruptive behavior. I'm going to reach out to the family. Hey, I just wanted to let you know that I've pulled so and so to the side 3 times this week and they're still having a hard time with this. This is what I've noticed. This is what I've done. How can we fix this together? And I'll have that conversation with the family. After I've reached out to the family, if it continues, even after I got the family involved, then I'm going to either reach out to admin or I'm going to look at maybe a behavior plan or tracking the behavior because maybe a behavior plan is needed for this student and there's an underlying need not being met. So that's what I'm going to then put or the steps I'm going to take. So, going over the different levels of redirection is what I call this. So, what I'm going to do instead is first proximity. Second, I'm going to shout out those students who are following the procedure and tell them exactly what I like that they're doing. I'm going to have a sideline conversation with them. I'm going to reach out to families. And then finally, if it continues, then I'm going to start tracking behavior and admin contact. Notice I'm not giving them, oh, you're supposed to be paying attention. Oh, I'm waiting on 2 students to have their eyes on me. It's very step, step, step. There's like no warnings. There's just like first time, second time, third time, because the more warnings you give kids, they're going to continue pushing the boundary. They know that you're not going to do anything until the 4th time you give them a warning. And that's just naturally how kids are. They're learning where the boundaries are. So that's the next thing I use. Now, the third and final thing I use, I still like to celebrate positive behavior apart from, shouting out behavior or calling out positive behavior that I see throughout the day. I like to use what I call a super improver wall. Now, a super improver wall was actually created by Whole Brain Teaching. And what it is everyone starts off at different levels and they have stickers and they essentially fill out the sticker chart. And every time they fill it out, they level up. I take this a step further and I like to do glow notes on top of it. So whenever a student fills up their sticker, they're going to go to the next colored level and I will send that first passport home with a glow note talking about how awesome that student has been doing. So what is great about this is I'm building positive relationships with families. The student is getting positive notes home, which, let's be honest, sometimes we don't always have time for. It helps me keep accountable to make sure I'm having positive touch points with families. And then it has that intrinsic motivation. Students learn to be proud of themselves for their behavior and accountable for their behavior. And they try really hard to earn glow notes. So I've done this in the past and my kids love it. My families love it. And I've actually had families frame these glow notes that I sent home with my kids. So that's what I use instead. I try really hard not to call out disruptive behavior because the more you put a spotlight on it, the more attention you draw to it, the more often it's going to occur. If I tell you, don't run, don't run, don't run, your first reaction is, I kind of want to run just to see what happens, right? But if I say, thank you so much for using walking feet, I love how so-and-so is pushing in their chair, you're naturally going to want to do those things. So by using the super improver wall instead of the clip chart, I'm focusing on that positive behavior and it creates a much more positive environment. And by focusing on the sideline conversations, I'm getting to the root cause as to why the disruptive behavior is happening. I can't even tell you 9 times out of 10, a majority of the time, the disruptive behavior was happening at kinder through 2nd grade because of an underlying reason, because something was happening, because they were trying to solve something. Kids rarely, and I'm emphasizing rarely do something malicious just to be mean to you, at least for what I can speak for at the primary age. So making sure you get to the root cause before you call them out is really, really important. And it's going to help give them skills to fix that disruptive behavior from happening before. Whereas before, when I use the clip charts, the student would know that behavior was bad, but they would just label themselves as bad, as opposed to sitting down, having a step-by-step plan to do better next time to fix the behavior. It's just completely different. And it creates a completely different environment. One of my values as a teacher is to have a positive classroom and to be as positive as possible. And one of the ways I achieve that is by using this instead of the clip chart. So that wraps up everything I have to say about using clip charts, why I personally don't use them, my experience with them, and what I use instead. The 3 things I use instead are those classroom procedures, and then the different levels of redirection, whether that's proximity, shouting out, sideline conversations, family contact, and then admin support, and then the super improver wall to kind of just be like the cherry on top. Now, the reason I did it in this order is actually because those are the orders of priority. I put a huge emphasis on my classroom procedures because those are the foundation. That's the base. That's the cake. And then I have the different levels of redirection. That's the frosting on the cake, and then the super improver wall. It's not needed, but it's the cherry on top that just kind of ties everything together. So if you found this helpful, I would love it if you could like, subscribe, or send me a DM or a comment how helpful you found this, and make sure to share it so we can reach more teachers who need this information. If you want to dive further into classroom management, I want to invite you to check out the Classroom Management Guide. I answer the top 10 questions I get asked in regards to classroom management, plus I link to additional YouTube and podcast episodes for you to check out my in-depth answers to those questions. The next thing I have for you is a classroom management bundle. If you're wanting stuff like my classroom procedure slides and stuff like that to help make your classroom run smoothly, definitely recommend checking out that bundle. I try to put everything I use in my classroom for classroom management in one spot so you don't have to think about it. And finally, the last thing I have for you is the Classroom Management Challenge. The Classroom Management Challenge is a 15-day challenge where every day I give you one single prompt that'll help you create your classroom management plan. The goal of this 15-day challenge is to help you create a classroom that is automated, where your students automatically follow the expectations in class. So make sure to check that out in the description down below. As always, remember, we are stronger together, and I'll see you in the next one, Teacher Bestie. Bye. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. I hope that you were able to take away some value that will help you thrive inside and out of the classroom. It would mean the world to me if you could take 5 seconds right now and leave a review on this podcast. And if you found this podcast especially helpful, make sure to take a screenshot of this episode right now and tag me on your socials to let me know you're listening. As always, remember that we are stronger together. With all the love in the world, Helena, aka the Present Teacher. See you next time, Teacher Bestie.